Technical issues. Straightened
Here
out
we
now.
are. Here we are. So you want me to start, or you want to start?
You go ahead and start.
All right.
I'm having a cramp in my leg.
Oh,
Okay.
ouch. Get that ready before we.
Yeah. Okay.
How are you doing, John? On this beautiful day over
It
here?
is beautiful. It's extremely bitterly cold here. I haven't been out yet, and unfortunately I do have to go out, but it was 5 degrees when I woke up. It's gone up to 6, maybe 8 now. I don't know.
Nice.
Yeah,
balmy,
really nice.
balmy Chicago weather.
Crazy. And it was so warm earlier in the week, and it's going to get warm later in the week. So it's like, what is going on?
Yeah.
Anyway.
Welcome to Chicago.
Yeah, really.
I'm sure the wind is nice too.
It's not too windy right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's okay. Although an hour ago, had we done this an hour ago, it would have been interesting because there was this gaggle of, or whatever the right word is, of ravens or crows.
Oh, yeah. Murder of crows. Murder of crows, I believe is what it is. Yes.
Yeah, that gathered in a tree outside the apartment. It was like so loud. It's amazing. And then they took off. Anyway, here we are. Speaking, actually, it's relevant to our topic, right? It's like, are they flying together or are they flying alone?
There you go. There you go. There you go.
So, yeah, I know we announced last week that Stephen Folder would be here this week, but he's actually going to make it next week. And to talk about his new book and practicing under stress, basically, in challenging times, which we can all relate to, I think.
I think so, yes.
But this week,
yeah, slightly different topic. Basically the difference between practicing in a Sangha and practicing alone. I was working on a video about this, which will be out in several weeks. It was prompted by a question that one of my supporters on Patreon asked, which had to do with, in early Buddhism and in Buddhism in general, the Buddha certainly praises the Sangha and the role of the Sangha, and it's one of the 3 jewels, one of the things that supports our practice. But at the end of his life, the Buddha had this, we might say, surprising advice to have yourself as refuge and take no other refuge, and have the Dharma as refuge and take no other refuge. And so I think the question that he was asking, which is a good one, is how we reconcile our practice in a Sangha and the refuge in the Sangha through that practice with this advice that the Buddha gives, just to have yourself as refuge. And
as the island, yeah.
As the island, yeah, right. And does that mean that we should be practicing alone? I don't think that's what the Buddha meant, but nevertheless, that's something to contemplate. And if not, then sort of what might the Buddha have meant, and what can we make of it in our practice?
If he even said it, right? We're just making certain assumptions, but yes,
yeah, of course,
we have to record it. Some level of confidence in that,
right?
Although in the end, it could have been written by somebody who just hated the Sangha. No. Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And I don't necessarily, these are not mutually exclusive anyway, of course. Absolutely. And, when you, in my position, teaching a lot, I often hear it's so much easier to practice with others. And even online, we have, as you know, we have a daily Sangha, and especially in times of challenge, people are really happy to be practicing with others. And there is, even online, there is some sense of, these mirror neurons doing something. And that, when we are practicing with others, we are feeding on their energy as they are feeding on ours, in a sense.
Yeah.
And yet, I've certainly taken my share of solitary retreats. or at least solo retreats where, I may be practicing on my own, but others are in the same space. Or yeah. But it's not a group practice. And that's kind of a middle way in a sense, right? Where you are with others at the same time you're doing your own thing. As opposed to really being solitary. And God knows I've known plenty of former monastics who've done extended solitary retreats. And there is obviously great value in that. I think the longest one I've done is 2 weeks, of solitary retreat, meaning that you're not ever practicing with a group. You're in your own little hut or kuti and practicing on your own.
And they bring food to you, or how does that work?
Yeah. In some cases, you have to make your own food, but I mean, in the place I've gone most recently, you bring your own. They bring it for you. That's secondary, but it's in fact, in many ways, I wouldn't mind bringing my own food and just finding a space to do that. But it's a different experience, and they're both necessary, I think, and valuable.
Yeah.
And you certainly, when one is doing solitary retreat, there can be pretty strong feelings of loneliness at times. And yet, it's funny, a dear friend of Upadi's from the Triratna order, who died a few weeks ago, Kamala Shila, who was a wonderful teacher. He spent, I think, at least a year on solitary.
Wow.
And so it was a cabin somewhere in the woods, and it sounded beautiful, and he sort of made his space and made it his, and went out for his morning walks. And I know when I've been on solitary retreat or even on solo retreat at the Forest Refuge, if I don't make a schedule for myself, I get lost. And so the schedule is really important. The practice itself, the meditation practice themselves, can be quite deep. And yet, practicing with others, especially if there's a lot of chanting involved, which is often the case, there's something really powerful in that.
Sure. Well, and also, I'm assuming that this guy who spent a year in solitary practice must have had support of the Sangha, at least indirectly, in terms of food and requisites. Because, you would... this is one of the things that, that in fact is, part of the Buddha's reason for praising the Sangha, is that, even when you're practicing supposedly alone, quote unquote, even when you're out in your kuti, your hut in the woods, the Sangha is still supporting you through
in
food, through water,
and checking in, one would assume,
right, through any number of different ways. So you might even say that that's not real. It's that even that is sort of a middle road. You're not literally on your own, and in fact, it's the support that the Sangha is providing you is essential. You wouldn't be able to do it without the Sangha, because getting your own food and making your own food out in the woods for a year, I guess most of us probably wouldn't be able to do that. Some people might be able to, but that's probably a small number nowadays.
We are definitely spoiled in that sense, in terms of what we're accustomed to. It really, yes, there is support required in one way or another. Which isn't to say, I'm just thinking, as you were talking, I was thinking about, Thoreau.
Yeah, of course. And he was supported, he really was.
He was what?
He was supported. A lot of people, I shouldn't say a lot. Some people make fun of him because, he made it out to be very, very, alone in the forest, whereas the facts were somewhat different. Nevertheless, it's a wonderful book. And,
he wasn't necessarily going there to be alone per se. although that had something to do with it. But
Yeah.
he also went into town to buy food, so
Exactly.
it's like,
and people brought him food, and he had.
yeah, and frankly, I mean, if I were on solitary in the right place, I would probably do the same thing. It doesn't.
Exactly.
It's there's a certain hermit-like quality to that kind of practice, which is beautiful.
Yeah.
And you're not responsible to anybody but yourself in those moments,
Mhm.
and that is liberating on one level.
Yeah.
But then there is the desire to be with others that is like that comes up, and it's like that's something to work with.
Yeah.
So it's like what you end up practicing with is very different, I think.
Yeah.
At least when you're on solitary, you're not worried about retreat romance, and which can, for many people can be a big obstacle.
Yeah.
Especially early on. I don't recommend going on a solo retreat unless you have a lot of experience on retreat in general.
Yeah. I'm sure
because you'll be lost.
Well, one of the things, when I was doing the research for the video, one of the things that the Buddha does talk about is there's an interesting sutta where a monastic asks the Buddha about going off into solitary retreat. He says, I want to go into the forest to practice alone. And the Buddha says, I don't recommend that unless you have a lot of skill in deep meditative absorption. He says, people who can do deep meditative absorption usually have a good time, being by themselves in the forest. He says people who don't, that is, we might say, people who don't have a very deep meditation practice, as you say, maybe who have experience having gone into retreat a number of times. He says they tend to either sink down or float away, which I would say probably means that they get lost, wherever they are, or they disrobe, they leave, they decide they just can't hack it. So he says, basically, I think his advice to this particular monastic was that he would be better off in the sort of guidance and protection of a monastic environment, rather than sort of going off into the forest by himself. And I think that's the kind of thing you're talking about, really.
Yeah, and we're also making assumptions, we as Westerners often do, that, if you're a Buddhist monk in Thailand or Sri Lanka or wherever you're, meditation is the key thing, which is not actually the case necessarily.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
And so not all monks are meditators. And it's not just Buddhism, of course. There are plenty of stories of famous, Catholic monastics going off and doing their hermitage thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I get it. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know about meditative absorption, although if you're interested in that kind of practice, being on solitary is going to certainly support it, because you have very few distractions, hopefully. I mean, the only distraction is really your own mind.
Yeah, right.
Which isn't insignificant, for sure. So, because you'll be sitting there and then, what am I going to do next? What am I going to do after lunch? Oh, I can't wait for lunch.
Yeah.
Your day is set up in such a way that, if, at first you're just waiting until the next thing happens, so you can move on.
Yeah.
And, you're counting the days, which of course is not the point. So, now, I mean, on another extreme, and I was talking to somebody about this last night, excuse me, as you can tell, I've been battling a cold, and these temperature swings have not helped. I was talking to somebody last night about these dark retreats that are practiced in certain Tibetan traditions.
I don't know about that.
Oh my goodness. I think it's the Bon tradition primarily that does this, where, you are placed in a room, in like a cottage, and all the windows are blacked out. There's no light.
No light
at all.
Oh, wow.
And the normal, I mean, it's sort of, I don't know if I would call it normal, but I guess the the optimum length of practice is 49 days.
Ooh.
And I've talked to a couple of people who have done these, at least one person who's done the 49 days. There are various variations on this that have come up.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, yeah, it's quite remarkable because, what you start to see very much is the sort of inside of your mind in a different way. But you are isolated for 49 days without light, which sounds like torture, frankly.
It does.
At first glance. Obviously, meals are brought in, and that's how you have some sense of time.
Mm-hmm.
But after a while, even that kind of weakens, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And then they bring you out slowly, obviously, to get used to the light.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a very different kind of retreat, obviously, than going on a normal solitary retreat.
The other question I think that, which is related is just that in saying to make yourself a refuge and an island, we're not necessarily talking about going on retreat.
Right, or meditation at all.
Or meditation at all.
Yeah, or he wasn't.
So, yeah, it's just it's a more general kind of recommendation. Right. And there are, I think, any number of ways we can take that recommendation. To me, one important way to look at it is that the idea of the Sangha, at least in early Buddhism, and indeed in Buddhism all throughout history, has had a couple of different interpretations. One interpretation is the perfected Sangha of enlightened beings, or of and that's considered sort of the the ideal to which we aspire. That is considered sort of the what is it called, the field of merit, but there's also a second understanding of Sangha, which is the actual Sangha of practicing monastics, which is imperfect and which has problems and which gets into fights and which gets into all kinds of difficulties. And I think part of what the Buddha might have, this is just a guess, but might have been suggesting is, at the end of the day, you've got to make yourself your own practice the focus of your efforts, because Lord knows, Lord knows how your Sangha is going to be. Maybe it's going to be great, but maybe it's not. And at the end of the day, you've got to be, responsible to your own practice and to the Dharma, because he says, make yourself the refuge and make the Dharma the refuge. Those are the two. That's it. And so at the end of the day, even though the Sangha, your group of kalyana mittas, of spiritual friends, can be incredibly important. Indeed, it can be the most important thing to your practice. It might not be. Maybe you're just in a place where you're unlucky.
Oh yeah, and there is also something, at least in my experience with Sangha, even when it's a challenging Sangha, that's an amazing place to practice.
It can be.
Because
it depends on the challenges, I guess.
Of course. It confronts you with so much interpersonal dynamic that the interpersonal becomes the practice. And that is not a small thing.
Yeah, I think it also depends on the intentions of the people that surround you. In other words, they may be, as all of us are, deluded and prone to anger and hatred and all these things, greed. But if their intentions are relatively pure, if they mean well, you can sort of see past that and continue, and it can be helpful. Right. But there are also going to be cases of people who are just malicious. And who's, if you happen to be unlucky enough to be in that Sangha, particularly in a, in a more traditional environment where maybe you don't have the choice of leaving very easily. Maybe it's a Sangha that's sort of your Sangha and you don't, then this kind of advice might mean something to you.
Yeah. And, of course, the Sangha creates all sorts of other challenges to practice. sexual abuse being one
Exactly.
of them, of course. And how that plays a role in certain sanghas in a significant, especially those that fall apart often. and just the notion of hierarchies
Yeah.
can get in the way, and yet those things still can be a really interesting place of practice. How do we deal with communicating in challenging situations with a hierarchy that is really abusive of its power. Yeah, and so it's interesting. And I think I appreciate the fact that we sort of got out of the meditation side, because I think that how do we practice on our own? We might be living in an area where we're the only person interested in this.
Yeah, exactly.
So we have no choice but to practice on our own.
Yeah.
Although these days there's so many options online, that's what's changed in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
And in a big way in the last 6 years since COVID, really. So, people just got used to being in online communities wherever the hell they were.
Yeah.
And it's saved me, in terms of my own livelihood, of course, but it also saved me in being able to connect with others.
Yeah.
Very directly. So,
that's certainly not something that the Buddha would have foreseen.
Well, who knows? But yes. So yeah, it's like, I'm curious to hear from people who are listening to this. How do they find it? Because absolutely, especially early on in practice, the power of practicing with others has been a significant contributor.
Oh yeah.
To success in terms of meditation and success, whatever that is, in terms of
benefit, I think.
benefit.
I personally find the greatest benefit in practicing physically together in the same space with other people. The power and I don't know what you want to say, but just the effectiveness of what you're doing is heightened, at least in my experience, practicing together with other like-minded people who are, generally very, very friendly and good people. And yeah, so if that's an option, I can certainly understand why people would prefer it, and because it is preferable, really, for most of us under most circumstances.
Yeah, and especially for people who aren't monastics.
People starting out, for sure.
Yeah, there's no question that the Sangha is important. Even as you know, I practice or teach in both the Dharma realm and in the quote secular realm. But even in the secular realm, the community that's created is very important, because you realize whatever you're experiencing is being experienced by mostly everyone else.
Yep.
And once you learn that and realize that, then it's not so special. You're not so special,
Right. It's the kisagotami, the mustard seed parable.
Yeah.
That I'm not the only one who's suffering, and that I can learn by talking to and hearing from other people and their experiences.
Yeah.
We're all in this together, and we're all kind of in the same boat.
Yep. Was it Ram Dass says, yeah, we're all on the same path home, or I think that's a quote of his. Some teacher says, yeah, we're just a bunch of schlemiels, trying to get to the same place, together. There's something about that, which is true, and it's and there's something also, there's this, we talk about this a lot in teacher training, that normalizing an experience is really important. What's really fascinating in a group, and you can sort of experience this happening, though it may not be obvious to everyone, but somebody will say something like, Yeah, I had this amazing out-of-body experience, and it was just really cool, and then everybody else in the group wants to have the same experience. And so as a teacher, the only way I can handle that is says, oh yeah, it sounds like you had an experience. And,
And, yeah, right.
and what else?
Yep.
That's just something that happens. Everybody has something happening. And sometimes it's quite surprising and seems extraordinary, and yet it's nothing more than just an experience.
Right. And that can be helpful. That having a group, having a sangha of people who have extensive practice can help get. This is one of the ways in which that sangha of spiritual friends can help keep you on the right path.
Yeah.
Because you can get easily diverted especially if you're, relatively new to this, and you have an amazing experience,
Right.
as tends to happen from time to time.
Sure.
You may think, oh, I'm off on that. You may get diverted off onto a sort of a side track.
Or you may think it's the track.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Yeah,
exactly.
You mistake this kind of sidetrack for
Right.
where you really want to be. And it helps to have people who have a little bit more experience.
Absolutely.
To be able to sort of, guide you back and say, that's great and lovely, but that's not really what we're after, at the end of the day. Although it's nice to have them. I mean,
sure, enjoy it while it's happening.
Exactly.
But don't make a big deal out of it.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's like the group, the community kind of slaps you around a bit and puts you in your place in a loving way.
Exactly.
That can happen too. So yeah. So, I think the answer to the question is both and.
Yeah.
But also, don't go off on solitary if you don't have much experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
That might be a little risky.
Yeah, it can be risky. Yes, as we discussed a while ago with the issue of dangers of meditation.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Some people, even in a sangha, in that case, even in a group, if you dive too deeply too quickly,
right,
you can come up with trouble. So yeah, go slow. And the advice that the Buddha gave again was at the end of his life when he was about to pass away, and probably was concerned about the sangha as an institution, and saying
it's great, but don't count on it.
Right, don't necessarily count on it. Keep your own wits about you, and keep the Dharma about you, and that'll lead you in the right direction.
Yeah, great.
Yeah. Keep digging the Dharma,
friends.
Right?
Yeah, and digging the Dharma, and as folks are well aware, one of the things that keeps us in community is coffee.
That exactly keeps us awake. Otherwise, we're falling asleep.
Keeps us awake, or you go to the neighborhood cafe, and that's another kind of community.
True.
So there's all sorts of things that happen as a result of coffee, and this show happens as a result of coffee. To some degree,
it's a third place for all of us.
So I don't know that it's exactly a refuge, but it
close enough.
Close. Yeah. And so if you'd like to buy us a cup of coffee,
diggingthedharma.com.
Diggingthedharma.com, and we would love to hear from you as well. So either through the YouTube channel or through our website, you can leave us comments, and we'll respond.
Yeah.
So
comments, questions, concerns. Yeah.
And next week, my friend and colleague Stephen Folder will be joining us to talk about a book he's recently written and just how it has been to practice in the Middle East these days. And things have, I think, where he lives have quieted down somewhat. We'll find out. But it is definitely a challenge, and his book is about practicing with challenges primarily. Yeah. I just got it. I have to quickly peruse it, and in time for next week. So, okay, friends, great to be with you, Doug, and
keep digging the Dharma. You got it. Great to see you, Jon.